I'm very much drawn to the two other people giving a share at this time, but I'll control myself. Okay, and stay with my share. Let me tell you what I hope to be focusing on in the next for the next 40 minutes or so. I want to talk a little bit about some of the cultural changes that are going on and tie it to Jewish thinking on the core Jewish value of Hakaras Hatov. The very word to be Jewish comes from the word gratitude, right? Leah has one more than her fair share of children and calls him Yehuda, Hapamo des Hashem. And another fascinating insight comes from what we're told that in the future, even after the Mashiach comes, every sacrifice, every korban will be batel. It'll be canceled. But the only korban that will never be canceled is the korban toda. The need to give thanks is something that will outlive even the times of the Mashiach. So let me start with the fascinating article. I don't know how many of you saw this on the front page of today's New York Times. I'm sorry, today's Wall Street Journal. Okay, so a very long article, and it was about how Facebook executives had very seriously gone on record with serious concerns about how social media, and more specifically Facebook itself, tends to maximize conflict, heighten divisiveness, whereas Facebook was designed to heighten connection, ostensibly. And the Wall Street Journal staff had done some investigative journalism and discovered that Facebook decided that their business model would not work well if they didn't continue to have that kind of divisiveness and recognition that it's a platform that needs to feed users with the even more divisive content in order to attract people, because people are attracted by negativity. Now, why am I starting with this in a talk on Erev Shavuos about this core Jewish value? It's because we know that the antidote to that kind of cynicism is actually gratitude. I want to talk about some strategies in terms of how to bring that kind of gratitude into our lives. And I'm struck by a story that I learned a couple of years ago when I was spending some time at a scholar in residence weekend in California, where I spoke to a very senior executive of Facebook who was a member of our community, member of the YU community, and he had just moved from Silicon Valley, where he was a very senior executive in the company, because he wanted to give his kids a more wholesome Jewish experience than he thought he could get for them living in Silicon Valley. And he was shocked at how the senior executives of all the major companies in Silicon Valley didn't let their kids anywhere near screens or anywhere near social media. And the first thing that hit him was that the kids in the community he moved into had a certain cynicism and had the kind of negativity that comes with heavy exposure to what the front page of today's Wall Street Journal is talking about. So I want to develop this a little bit so that we could go to hopefully by the end of this year, think about this in a little bit of a more practical way about what to do about it. Okay. Okay, Nachum, do I have a way to keep showing my slides? Okay, let me just see. Okay, I guess it goes like this. Okay. Okay, now what? I'm going to get away from the PowerPoint and talk about this the way they used to in the old country. I'll just talk to you all. Okay. So let me move on. Oh, I see. Here we go. Let's see if this works. No, it's frozen. Okay, fine. Okay, let's go to the next point I want to make. Maybe I'll even stop the share so that I can see more of you. Okay. Um, another vignette to amplify this point a little bit more. I had a very interesting experience with our Israeli doctoral students earlier this year. 5 times a year, we have our doctoral students come from all over the world to spend about 3-4 days of intensive study with us, focusing. These are heads of school and senior leaders in modern Orthodox schools around the world, United States, Canada, but also from our Israel and other countries as well. And the focus at the conference earlier this year was on enhancing spiritual development. And one of the fascinating recurring themes that we got from a program that we had where we invited the people running the Makar Chayim program at the school started by Rabbi Steinsaltz and led by brilliant educators on how to deepen spiritual connection. So what the students in the various high schools who we interviewed about what connects them to spirituality and what alienates them from spirituality. A recurring theme was the theme of when they got to Israel to start the program and to work intensively with a number of Israeli fellow students and youth leaders there and Rebbeim there, is the first thing that hit them was they never realized how cynical they were until then, and how the default setting as American adolescents was cynicism. And by the way, that kind of cynicism gets in the way of implementing many of the gratitude exercises that we'll be talking about tonight, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then they said that one of the most powerful growth experiences that came to them in their time with the program, which was partly in Israel and then partly coming back to the United States with a cohort of the mentors they connected with in Israel, was they got the strength to overcome the cynicism and replace it with the optimism and the connection that's necessary for living the life of a fully connected Orthodox Jew. But I found it fascinating how much of a recurring theme that was with everybody we interviewed and the extensive interviews we did with the various high school kids we talked about. So again, the question is, what do we do about this? How do we handle this? Let me speak about this in terms of the concept of cynicism in Jewish thinking, Yerganut, okay? So it says in Mishlei, it talks about that concept. I'll just give you the pasuk in Mishlei, Perek Tes Vav, pasuk Chafes, where it says, and I'll just give you the English translation: a perverse man sows quarrels, and a whisperer separates close friends. And the Masuda Sion says here, what's an irgan? And it's somebody who's constantly complaining. Let me develop this a little bit more. Let me talk to you about a fascinating Meshech Chachma. So the Meshech Chachma has a brilliant insight, psychological insight, into the cost of cynicism which I find to be amazingly illustrative. It goes like this. It talks about the Kallah, right? So we learn in Vayikra, by Dever Rosh Bnei Yisrael, Vayotziu es Kallah al michutz lamachaneh. Okay, so Moshe had to find out how do we handle the Kallah, okay? And it says that you have to stone the Kallah. And then there's like a redundant pasuk. It says, "V'nei Yisrael asu kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe." It says, so Moshe has a direct divine command to stone the Kallah. What's the need for there to be the end of the pasuk of saying, "V'nei Yisrael asu kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe"? Why the redundancy? And the answer, I think, is a brilliant psychological insight. And isn't this true? A complainer can cool off your enthusiasm. The Makalo complained. What did he complain about? The Lechem Hapanim. He made fun of a mitzvah that involves making a carbon of week-old, cold, stale bread. And the danger was that's so contagious. Somebody who's cynical and somebody who's constantly complaining, all you have to do is go on social media on any given day, any social media, and you'll see how completely filled it is with nonstop kind of cynicism and complaining, and literally throwing, basically squelching any passion we have for being able to lead a connected life. So the Meshech Chochmah explains that the complaints of the Makalo did not impact on the enthusiasm that Bnei Israel had in carrying out the Kasher Tziva Hashem. That's the reason for the end of the pasuk. Okay? But the bottom line here is it's in our own lives. We have to be aware of the cost, of the tremendous cost of speaking cynically around our children, around our students. The cost of even having guests over for a Shabbos and Yontif table, which I'm hoping we'll be able to get to, hopefully sooner rather than later. And to have people complaining in different ways about, I don't know, it could be about the school, about the rabbi, or it could be about anybody. And what we have to understand is that it has this kind of pervasive impact on our connection in terms of spirituality, and it's particularly catchy for our children. Okay, what's the antidote? Antidote is the opposite. The antidote is what we're talking about today. Next, one more point before I get into some specific recommendations, and that's the research of Dr. Gilovich at Cornell University. Dr. Gilovich is a well-known social psychologist. And he's done some fascinating research on the difference between headwinds and tailwinds in terms of human nature, okay? So there's the whole concept of people, let's say, going running. So let's say you have people who are going out for a run, okay? And let's say you're running into the wind, into a headwind. So it's a terrible obstacle. It's not so easy. And it's blowing at you, it's slowing you down, and it's making your workout that much harder. But then you turn around, and now the headwind becomes a tailwind. Should be wonderful, right? Should be something we're grateful for, okay? The air that had been pushing against you is now pushing you forward. The question that Dr. Gilovich and his colleagues asked is, do you still notice it? Do you still notice the benefit of the tailwind, the benefit of the good stuff that comes your way? And he's done a number of studies that show that headwinds, meaning the obstacles in our life, are far more powerful than tailwinds. So what he and his colleague, Dr. Davidai, finds is that in many different parts of life, there's a tendency to have a hard time seeing the benefits that comes our way, and an easy time getting sucked in to maybe a certain degree of cynicism about the obstacles. So for example, in a series of research studies, they looked at groups of Democrats and Republicans. In fact, granted Democrats and Republicans in a year like this. And they found that most Democrats, the vast majority of politically engaged Democrats, were convinced that the political system favored Republicans. And most Republicans were convinced that it favored Democrats. What about in families? Siblings, same thing. We probably all experienced this in our own family. You look at a group of older siblings and you ask them, were your parents tougher on you than they were on your younger siblings? Overwhelming majority of older siblings say, oh yeah, they were much tougher on me. My younger siblings had it very, very easy, okay? And it's the reverse when you ask the younger siblings about their older siblings. The whole idea of mom always loves someone else the most. And that's human nature. Human nature is to have a hard time recognizing the benefits and an easier time recognizing the challenges, okay? And that becomes the enemy of gratitude. The biggest challenge with gratitude, now to get to the heart of what we're talking about, is that because we take the tailwinds of life for granted, the headwinds consume all of our attention, and we have to work very hard to count our blessings. Here's the research. We all know the research. If you ritualize, okay, some kind of a ritual that every Friday night or every Yontif night, as we'll have tomorrow night and for over Yontif, if you have a ritual of going around the table, counting your blessings, okay, going through and saying, what are some of the blessings I've had? Okay, let's count the blessings from the week. Having your children, even though they're going to be cynical about it and they're going to push against it, but insist that they do it. Insist that they count their blessings. Because when they do, they're usually happy about doing it. And especially adolescents are going to be cynical about it. Still push it. And then when they count their blessings and say, okay, this week I had the following things happen that I'm grateful for. And then you ask, and I had the following ways that I experienced chesed from somebody else. And the following ways I did chesed for others. When you ritualize it that way, a number of fascinating benefits come. Happiness levels shoot up for a couple of days. Immune system functioning shoots up. Cardiac functioning shoots up. Our sleep improves in the following ways. We fall asleep more quickly. We discipline ourselves before we fall asleep to think about three images of something from our lives that we're really grateful for. And there's always something to be grateful for, even during lockdown. It could be a smile from one of your children. It could be, if you're living alone, a smile or a well-cooked meal or a very connected Zoom call, whatever it might be. We could be grateful for it. And to the extent that we could discipline ourselves to do that, it has all of these incredible kinds of benefits. But it's hard. It's hard. You know, I just talked about some of the forces from society that work against it. But let me get now to some specific recommendations in the time that we're left with, okay? So number one is I wanted to talk about the ordeal of the ordinary, the title of this year, the power of that. And I'll just tell you a story, because I think that the stories might be one of the more powerful ways of getting this stuff across. It's a story of a visit I made to Frankfurt. So every few years, until recently, there was a conference in Frankfurt paid for by companies that benefited from slave labor during World War II. By German law, they have to sponsor a conference for the ever-dwindling number of survivors still living in Europe. And they have a conference where they have mental health people come, and where they have a number of therapists of different, different backgrounds and trauma experts. And they have also the Russian Jewish therapists who are working with the survivors. And the first time I went, I was kind of reluctantly invited by the person running the conference because they had never used an Orthodox Jew before. And he comes to me, he says, listen, David, he had met me at a Jewish medical ethics conference in Europe, actually, in Switzerland. And he said, David, I have a weird thought. I heard you speak. I never thought of using Jewish thinking in terms of our conference that we have every few years in Frankfurt. But I have a wild idea. How about if we give it a shot? Do you think Judaism has anything to offer to our understanding of suffering? So I had to pretend not to smile. I said, yeah, let's give it a shot. So I go. And the first time I go, I think there were about 400 people there. Everything I said in my talks was being translated into, I think, 5 languages. It was German, French, Hebrew, I forget whatever the other ones. There were people behind the glass booth. I had headphones on, and everything was being translated. And after I gave my first talk, which very heavily dealt with the learning and teachings of Shamshon Hirsch, who had his show right near where we were, where the conference took place. They never heard of him. So I thought, let them learn about the legacy that Hitler stole from them, of learning about the brilliance of Rav Hirsch, and learning about the brilliance of other Jewish thinkers on suffering. So I told them about how Rav Hirsch talks about in tough times, the vowelization of the Pasuk in Tehillim, Keli Keli Lama Azavtani, isn't why, not lama, but lama, for what? You have to go from the why to the what. And I illustrate it with a variety of stories and experiences I had in terms of what I learned from various traumatized populations I've worked with, but mostly in terms of the work. I built it off the work of Rav Hirsch. And they were all listening very attentively as it was being translated. One group laughed about 2 minutes later than any of the others. I won't even guess which culture that was. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't know who's in this audience. But when I got up to take questions, so about 40 people formed a line to ask questions. And the first person on the line was a woman who was selected by Mengele to go to her death. I'm sorry. I think 9 of her siblings were selected on the horrible day that she experienced that selection. And all of her siblings, and I believe her parents, were selected to go to their death. Only she was sadistically selected to go and survive. From that day on, I heard from her therapist later, she never thought in Yiddish. She totally stopped identifying with the Jewish part of her. And she was never able to tell anybody about what had happened. Her therapist didn't know about what the trauma was during the Holocaust. And she gets up behind the microphone and she starts speaking in Yiddish for the first time in over 70 years. Luckily, I understand enough Yiddish. I don't speak Yiddish, but I understand Yiddish fairly decently. And she tells over in incredible detail, through her tears, this amazing story of what happened to her during those horrible years and what happened to her on the day that she was selected to live. She never talked about it. But then everybody behind her, the other 39 people waiting to ask questions, they all had the same message. The message was, Dr. Pelcovitz, do you know how lucky you are? Do you know what a miracle it is to be able to have a life where you're able to integrate basically Torah U'Mada, the wisdom of Torah, with the wisdom of secular knowledge? That was robbed from us. We never even knew what we were missing till we just heard this. And it was often said with tears and with intensity. From that day on, I had gratitude I never even knew I had to have. I had a gratitude for the miracle of walking the streets of Washington Heights and being able to appreciate in a whole different way what we have tonight. The ability to learn in a way that you have, unbelievable speakers tonight. Again, opposite me is, my former chavrusa, Rabbi Dr. Schechter, who I'm addicted to listening to, and the other person I'm addicted to listening to, who's Rabbi Daniel Feldman, who's brilliant. And we have a whole program like that. So we have to know what to be grateful for. A few other simple recommendations. It's the recommendation to cue into the uniqueness of each of our children and of ourselves. Uniqueness, the unique spark of everybody we're living with. We're living at a time we're under lockdown. There are times we probably want to kill our children. There are probably times we could lose it with the spouse or with the parent or with the grandparent. But keep in mind this. It's going to be in reverse, but this beautiful Rav Kook, okay, which I know you've heard, but it just makes me feel great. Sarach shekolish yevin, every person has to know, shebetoch tocho dolek ner, that in his inner essence, there is a fire. Vein ner shalo kener chavero, no two fires are identical. Vein is shein lo ner, there's no two people who don't have, there's nobody alive who doesn't have uniqueness. We have to tune into our signature strengths. What are our greatest hits? What are the greatest hits of the signature strengths of our children and of our family members? Because that's the superpower that builds on resilience to find our unique contribution. And he goes on to say, Tzara shekolish yeda v'yavin sha'alav lamo u'legalos es ar haner barabin. We all have to know that we have to work to spread the flame of our uniqueness to others. To set the world ablaze with that fire. That's the key. The key in terms of gratitude is to find gratitude for the uniqueness. And again, how do you do it? I think we have to figure out a way. Some people do it through just focusing on it. This is a unique time where we have the ability to look inwards, where we have the ability to ask the three questions that the Rav would talk about are essential in terms of self-reflection and in terms of building up our Bein Adam La'atzmo and our Bein Adam L'Makom and our Bein Adam L'Chaver. What are the three questions? The three questions that Yaakov asked his army and his family to be ready to answer for the fateful encounter with Esau. Who are you? Where are you going? What are you going to do with what you have? Shavuos is an ideal time for us to be able to ask ourselves those three questions. You know what the research shows? When you ask those questions, what are my long-term goals? Where do I see myself down the road? What do I want to work on in the coming year or even in the coming weeks as we go into re-entry, God willing? Research shows that to the extent that you cue in to your goals and into the answer of those three questions, two things will happen. Not only will your happiness level shoot up, but it'll make it more likely that you'll realize those goals. And let me end with a final story. It's a story about gratitude. And again, it's a story I've shared recently, but it just makes me, I'm just inspired by the story. I heard this from Rabbi Rosner. And the story goes like this. There was a Rav, like an older, very respected Rav in Eretz Yisrael, who every Rosh Chodesh would go to the lobby of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital and would just stand there in the lobby, staring for hour after hour after hour. People would come up to him and say, do you need directions to visit somebody? He'd say, no, I'm fine. I mean, he obviously would visit people at other times, but not Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, he would just stand in the lobby. And finally, somebody decided maybe it's not so chutzpahdik. Let's just ask him. Let's ask him what he's doing. And his answer, I think, is the bottom line recommendation that I want to leave you with. Here's the answer. The answer he gave was, I know, as I began with, he said, that it's very easy to be grateful to those you're not close to. Very easy to be grateful for unexpected kindness. That's easy. It's easy if somebody helps you change a flat on the Cross Island Expressway. It's easy to be grateful for that. But it's much harder to be grateful to those we owe the most to our spouse, to our children, to our friends, to our parents, to our grandparents. That's tough. That's a challenge. That's what my father Zal called Ordeal of the Ordinary. That research had many Jewish sources for it, but it's very, very hard to recognize that. So he says, I come here every Rosh Chodesh to recharge my batteries. First, I stare at cardiology, and I think to myself, do you know how many people are in the cardiology department here recovering from COVID-related cardiac problems, recovering from bypass surgery, recovering from maybe even dealing with congestive heart failure? And then I thank God for the miracle that even though I'm an older man, my heart seems to be working okay. Then I look at gastroenterology and I say to myself, wow, if even one part of my gastrointestinal system that should be open is closed, or that should be closed is open, I couldn't survive even a moment before you, God. Thank you for a well-functioning GI system. Because there are many people in that department that aren't so well. Then I look at neurology, and I thank God for a well-functioning brain, because I think about all the people with dementia and Alzheimer's and maybe brain tumors. And I totally am focused on that. And he says, sometimes I'll be there for 4 or 5 hours. But at the end of those 4 or 5 hours, I tell myself, listen, my batteries are now recharged. And I go home, and I know I'm ready to appreciate that which I take for granted for the rest of the month. And that's what I think we have to take from the holiday Shavuos. We have to take from the amazing wisdom of Chazal in terms of overcoming the ordeal of the ordinary. We're living in an age of nirganut, cynicism. We're living in an age where there's tremendous challenges to us on all of this. But may we all be zocha to be able to focus on what we have, count our blessings, and experience a full refuas hanefesh and refuas haguf. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Pelcovitz. I have posted in the chat the next set of shiurim that will be taking place at 11 p.m. They will start approximately 11:01, 11:02. And thank you again, Dr. Pelcovitz, and everyone should have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach.
Thanks for your help.